In the SEO world, obviously we've had rank tracking solutions forever, and still to this day, even though there's a lot of really advanced tools and techniques out there, a lot of the technology still is very focused on kind of this old 10 blue links world from the SERPs back in the day. And so everything is basically like, what is your rank? What's your average rank? What's your competitor rank? And that sort of thing. And you need that. I'm not saying that it's going away, but as we get further and further into this, we started to realize that you really need to be monitoring the entire SERP because that's what's having the largest impact on searcher behavior, user behavior. And so we really tried to push hard into that and go beyond that first level of simple rank tracking we've identified 3 additional levels beyond that into what we call basically holistic SERP monitoring.
Hi, and welcome to the Optimize podcast. My name is Nate Matherson, and I am your host. On this weekly podcast, we sit down with some of the smartest minds in content marketing and SEO. Our goal is to give you perspective and insights on what's moving the needle in organic search. Today, I'm thrilled to sit down with Ray Grieselhuber. Ray is the CEO of DemandSphere, a Y Combinator-backed data and analytics platform built for e-commerce and programmatic SEO teams, both in-house and agency. With over 17 years of experience in building and scaling SEO solutions, he leads a team of experts in ML, AI, data engineering, and organic marketing. On this week's episode, Ray and I chat about SEO strategy, SERP analytics, the future of SEO, and so much more. And this episode of the Optimize podcast is brought to you by Positional. If you don't know by now, my name is Nate, and I'm one of the co-founders of Positional, and we just launched our toolset publicly in late March. That means that you can go to positional.com and sign up for our toolset and play around. We've got a trial. We'd love for you to check out our tools for keyword research, internal linking, content optimization, and we've even got a couple toolsets for analytics as well, and you can check it out at positional.com. Ray, thank you so much for coming on this week's episode of the Optimize podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I ask all of our guests is, how did you get into the world of SEO?
I was an engineer originally and worked in enterprise software for about 5 or 6 years. Took a year off due to some burnout at the time, came back and was ready to get back into work and worked for a startup. I joined as like employee number 4 or something at a company that became known as Covario, and they were basically the first enterprise SEO platform on the market. And my job was to take a project that we've been given to turn it into a product. And we had about 3 months to build it. And so I had to ramp up very quickly on SEO. This was before people were even saying content marketing. And basically we got that launched, and then we were kind of off to the races from there.
And I know that you were just at the Brighton SEO conference. How was it?
It was good. This was my 3rd time being there. I went the first time to the England one last September as an attendee, just to get a feel for the vibe, and then spoke at the San Diego one. That's where I met you, last year. And then this was our first time having a booth, spoke again, and the conference was even bigger. I think it was about 5,000 people this time versus 4,000 last September. So it's growing a lot. There's a lot of really good energy there.
You had a talk, right? What did you talk about?
SERP analytics, as a company, we focused very heavily on SERP analytics because it's what we tend to be really good at. And my topic was basically going beyond the idea of what happened in SERP analytics to really help people understand how they can dig into the why and then those additional questions beyond that in terms of scaling out your SEO operations.
So for our audience, could you first define what is SERP analytics?
Sure. So in the SEO world, obviously we've had rank tracking solutions forever, and still to this day, even though there's a lot of really advanced tools and techniques out there, a lot of the technology still is very focused on kind of this old 10 blue links world from the SERPs back in the day. And so everything is basically like, what is your rank? What's your average rank? What's your competitor rank? And that sort of thing. And you need that. I'm not saying that it's going away, but As we get further and further into this, we started to realize that you really need to be monitoring the entire SERP because that's what's having the largest impact on searcher behavior, user behavior. And so we really tried to push hard into that and go beyond that first level of simple rank tracking into, we've identified 3 additional levels beyond that into what we call basically holistic SERP monitoring.
Can you walk us through those 3?
Yep. So the first level is, like I said, kind of just tracking your ranking on the organic rankings. That's a good way to get a feel for how Google's ranking system basically views your site at any given time. You need that, but that's a foundation. You have to move beyond that. Obviously, with the advent of SERP features 10 to 15 years ago, there's a whole new level of analytics that became necessary. And so these are looking at the presence of SERP features. It's looking at how much overall real estate they're taking up on the SERP. It's looking at whether or not your site or a competitor's site is appearing in them. It's looking at things like, is it a zero-click type of SERP feature? So that obviously is going to potentially have an impact on whether or not you even get traffic from that SERP. And so it's all of those things, and you can take that and build some additional kind of advanced metrics on that, looking at things like visual share of voice. And that's also the stage where you get into a lot of the big data analytics that come out of this because it's just an exponentially larger data set. So that's level 2. And then the next level 3 is when you really start to get into the visual impact measured at a pixel level. And this is something that we've always felt has been very important ever since we got into it. And it basically, the explanation that I gave during my talk was, if you look at Search Console data, there's 4 core metrics that come out of the Search Console performance metrics. You have average position, which kind of dictates your total number of impressions. You have clicks that come from that. And then you have your click-through rate. And basically, your click-through rate is determined by a bunch of factors that aren't really measured within Search Console. And so the question there becomes why. And so with the combination of that level 2 of monitoring the SERP features and the pixel data, you can really start to get a better understanding of why click-through rates may be lower despite the fact that your rankings have stayed the same or even improved. And so that level 3 is all about the pixel impact. And the pixel impact has an increasing level of importance for people to stay on top of because, for example, we're talking about SGE now. And, I think a lot of the anxiety about SGE is going to be about that pixel depth on the page. So it's basically how far down are these SERP features, including SGE, pushing down the organic rankings and your source of traffic.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting. I mean, I'm sure like 20 years ago, like SERP analytics wasn't as important given it was just 10 links. But today, like there are so many SERP features, obviously things like featured snippets, which I have a love-hate relationship with because like you mentioned, it can often lead to zero-click searches. And so it sounds like SERP analytics is like a more in-depth view of a search result page. And like you said, you might be ranking better for certain keywords, but on like a pixel basis, your result is actually much lower on the page. And so SERP analytics will help you more holistically understand like why you're getting traffic or lack thereof.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is so interesting. I'm guessing there's like a certain type of like client where this is like more important. Like your average blogger probably doesn't care about SERP analytics, right?
It's a good question. So just for clarity's sake, we basically operate in the enterprise, e-commerce, and large-scale websites, and so that's kind of what we know. So I'm not as up on what bloggers and maybe smaller businesses would need per se, but doing my own blogging, I do want to know, for example, if I put out a new post and I think it's really good and it may even rank number 2 or 3, but there's 3 YouTube videos above it that are clogging out that space, that probably means that those YouTube videos are going to get clicked long before my blog post is going to get clicked. And so this really gets into this idea of multimodality, which we hear about a lot in the LLM world, and I think multimodality in content marketing is a very important concept that people need to be dealing with as well.
Does that really mean like we need to exist possibly with a video as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very important.
Gotcha. And I guess when we're talking about SERP analytics, is it future looking or past looking? Where is it more valuable?
It's both. So we provide two ways of looking at this. We have a feature that we call SERP Rewind, which basically every SERP that we're monitoring, we archive in object storage. And then basically you can go back and replay that SERP at any given time. So if you want to see what a SERP looked like 6 months ago on a specific date versus today, you can do that. You can compare across different devices and so forth. So you always want to have that backward looking data because there's seasonality, there's trends, there's changes. And so that's definitely important. And then going forward, the way I look at it is basically if you agree with the data, really, that Google is still the largest source of traffic on the internet, and you know that these visual features have an impact on user behavior, then it's basically a very predictive set of data that you can use to build models around what you would be expecting in your traffic planning. And so a lot of the traditional traffic planning models around kind of the search volume multiplied by click-through rate that we see, only take into account those organic rankings unless you're using your own data from Search Console and the combination of all the search feature data to build a more accurate model. I don't like the word forecast in this because everything is very non-deterministic in the world of search, but modeling, at least you can say, like, these are what my assumptions are, and given a certain set of assumptions, this is how things can play out.
Well, I'm guessing a lot of listeners of this podcast might want to SERP rewind back to August of last year before the helpful content update. But I have to ask, and we're not going to spend this whole episode talking about algorithm updates, I promise. But what do you make of all of the volatility we've seen in search over the last 6 months?
Again, our world is more enterprise focused. And so, frankly, a lot of our customers did pretty well within the last round of updates. It definitely seems like, and this matches what I'm hearing, from other people, the data that we see, that Google is favoring the larger brands, the larger sites, much more than the smaller sites. And so, I think that there's that bias, which we've always kind of known exists. I think we all are kind of aware of the fact that Google definitely relies on user metrics in determining ranking positions. What that means is that in many cases, you're going to have kind of a self-reinforcing cycle of prioritization and favorability towards these larger, better-known brands in their behavior, above and beyond any additional favorability metrics that Google may be giving these sites in their ranking system. So I think there's a bias. I think a lot of the volatility has happened among these smaller players, and affiliates are getting hit. And obviously, the whole question around AI-generated content is a big topic that we could probably talk about that for the whole hour.
Might save that for later, Ray. But real quick, I want to double click on user behavior metrics. You're kind of stepping into some controversial waters here. I know Google has said privately, now publicly, that they look at reactions to documents, both positively and negatively, to know if a document is a good one. How much importance do you put on user engagement or user behavior data when it comes to ranking well on the SERP?
I think it's very important. I think it is a factor. I understand why Google has to say that they don't rely on it, but I never, even before I had, access to people and conversations and data, it just intuitively seemed like that's what they would do, because why would they not? They're a business. They have Google Analytics on almost every website out there. So they're going to see a lot more data. There's a reason they gave it away for free. So I know it's a controversial statement, but I've yet to hear anything convincingly that disproves me of that, other than just, strong assertions. I've talked to enough people that have been on the inside that are like, yeah, we can't really talk about it, but yeah, there's a level of that. And, you don't get the details on that, but you can kind of read between the lines. There's the lawsuit. I've read a bit of the documents out there. So there's lots of things that point to that.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially in those documents that you mentioned from the Department of Justice here in the United States, their antitrust hearing with Google in particular. There was one slide deck where they directly said that they used user behavior metrics to understand how well people react and use that learning to then influence future searchers' results, I think is what they said.
Well, and just from a training data perspective, you're going to detect patterns over time of what type of content is going to be more engaging. And so even without directly using those metrics, you could basically build models that would show you how people are likely to respond to things. And you're going to basically use that output as a way to, impact your rankings too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was like Nick Frost from Google's like Rank Brain team in Canada who said that Google's algorithms have gotten so good at like understanding like how a searcher reacts to a page and then uses that data to then predict how searchers would react to other pages. I know that is not exactly what Mr. Frost said, but paraphrasing it to a degree. And so as the idea here with larger websites, like established, well-known brands, there's naturally going to be like better engagement signals than versus a smaller, lesser known brand.
Definitely a factor. I think brand recognition does play a big or it does have a big impact. We don't always like to think about things like that as data-driven search people. We're very kind of meritocracy based in our thinking about like, well, Google's going to naturally reward the best content because they're an independent algorithm. But the big brands, they're well known, they have user trust, they spend a lot of money on ads. There's a lot of different factors that are going to potentially have some sway there.
Yeah, and I know we're like veering from the outline already, right? But like the other day, like Google said that like links don't matter or something to that effect. But I feel like links still matter. What do you
They
think?
absolutely matter.
Why do they matter?
Why would they not? I mean, it's especially now with the proliferation of content. We're going to see an even bigger explosion of content. They have to have reliable signals of trust from sources that they can rely on. And, there's a lot of really interesting conversations. I've never been a link builder, so this is not my area of expertise, but I've talked to a lot of smart people on that side of the house. And, it sounds like the new version of this is digital PR, which is a lot of brand mentions, and that's going to be included because of the way that the transformers work in ranking and displaying the content. And so the links may not be the only unit that matters, but more that kind of semantic brand mention could be equally important over time. But I just find it hard to believe that they would not use backlinks as a trust signal from reputable websites.
Yes, yeah, and digital PR, I don't think is a new concept. I feel like in the last couple of years, people have started calling it digital PR. I always used to call it like link building, but like these days we call it digital PR. It sounds nicer than link building. We had Andy Holland on the podcast a few months back, and
he's one of the guys I was thinking of. He's awesome.
He reiterated that even brand mentions without links and no follow links, like they've seen in their analysis, a direct correlation to then positive rankings. And so for all our listeners, that was a really interesting episode that you might want to go back to with Andy. But stay here for now. We're talking to Ray, and this has been so much fun so far. And thank you for the patience, Ray. I'm going to pull us back to the outline here. So the next question that I wanted to ask you is, I saw on LinkedIn that you host Found Tokyo, a meetup in Japan. And I saw on LinkedIn that you mentioned that you discussed that Google was apparently trying to reduce the amount of content it crawls and indexes. What did you meant by that? What did you discuss at the meetup?
So this is something that I have been thinking about a lot over the last couple of years, because what we started to see in our customers' data, we always get access to everybody's Search Console data. And so you can see the indexation. A lot of times we'll get access to log files, so you can see the crawls and the indexation there too. And even for large companies, we're starting to see a lot of companies really struggle to get their entire sets of sitemaps indexed, all the URLs indexed. And I think it's due to a number of factors. Number one, there is this whole wave of SEO techniques where people are like create excessive amounts of content that may or may not be relevant to people, just to hit whatever potential keyword Google may be trying to rank content for. So there's a lot of that. So I think websites in general got very bloated. And so I think Google is saying we've got to trim this down a little bit. It was kind of ridiculous. I think also I wrote an article about this, I think it was last June or July, basically called The Impact of Compute on Content in Both Directions. And the basic idea of this from the Google side of things was that money is not as cheap as it was before. I think that there's an underappreciated aspect of financial policy and how it impacts all the industries, especially IT. And so when you can't borrow lots of money for zero interest rate, that starts to change your financial models very quickly. And we've seen some catastrophic failures in the market due to what I would attribute to that. And I think that, you look at some of the statements made from Google, their advertising team, their revenues are still growing, but they're not growing at the rate that they were, and they're not growing at the rates that are comparable to like Meta and so forth. And so investors look at that kind of wondering what's going on there. And so I think that there's a cost happening there. Obviously, they're investing very heavily in AI, and they're investing in computation overall. The GPU market obviously is insane right now. So there's all these things, data centers, we haven't really talked about like data center power usage, cooling, all of that stuff. It all costs a lot of money. And I think that as they're looking at the potential explosion of content through AI creation, AI-based creation, they're realizing that they're going to have to become very selective about what they actually crawl and index on a regular basis. And so they're using crawl budget and indexation to help incentivize website owners to do a better job of getting relevant, high-quality content out there. There's a whole other aspect to this as well, which is, a couple years ago, everyone was worried about core web vitals, and they're like, well, is this going to be like in, a ranking signal, right? Everything is a ranking signal in SEO. And I think what got missed there is that it's not really that like if your specific core web vitals metrics are low, that's going to knock you down 3 rank positions. It's more like if your pages are taking 8 to 10 seconds to load still, which we still see a lot in a lot of different areas, Google's not going to want to index as much of your site to begin with. And so that's obviously the crawl budget discussion. And so all of those factors combined that was a lot of the background that I provided at the Found Tokyo event.
Yeah. And, we all often forget, at least a lot of us forget, that Google is a for-profit business at the end of the day. And we are, as SEOs, like building on top of their platform. If organic search is a channel that matters for us, and I'm guessing it does for a lot of the listeners on this podcast. So like the long and short of it, it sounds like that due to resource constraints, whether it be like power or cooling or GPUs, like Google is being a lot more selective in terms of crawling and indexing based on what you're seeing in your data. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. And does this apply really to just like the largest websites in the world, or does it apply also to like maybe medium-sized websites?
Yeah, I think it's across the board. It's everybody.
On LinkedIn, you also wrote that like a lot gets blamed on algorithms, and you went on to say that performing well in organic search goes way beyond the SEO teams, no matter how good they are at it. It requires a level of operational organization across all platforms, growth, executive, and even IT teams. How seriously this is taken is how bad you want to win, and it should be treated as a matter of delivering shareholder value. You also wrote that most SEO problems are corporate strategy problems. I just want to unpack this a little bit. Let's start first with like, what did you mean by a lot gets blamed on algorithms in regards to SEO performance?
So it's all kind of related to everything that you just read there, but the basic idea is that companies, whether they're SEO teams or executives or what have you, everyone obsesses about, oh, the algorithm is coming, it's going to get us what's going to happen. And going back to the indexation, going back to the performance, core vitals, most of the SEO problems that I see over and over again are due to the fact that companies do not have a good handle or a strategy for creating a quality digital product at every level of their customer interaction. And so their poor performance in most cases is due to that level of product issue versus they got bit by the algorithm. It's not like these algorithms at the end of the day are that sophisticated in terms of what they look for. So, and there's changes, but it's like the more things change, the more they don't, the more they stay the same too. And so I continue to shake my head when I hear statements like, we have to convince management that SEO matters. Well, well, I mean, it's the largest source of traffic on the internet. How does it not matter? So it's like it's insane to me that we still have these conversations, but that's exactly what I'm driving at when I make statements like that.
Yeah, this might not be just like a big company issue either. Like I talk to a lot of startups, of moderate size, and it often feels like they know that they want an SEO channel, but like they're not like willing to like put in the work to get it, and it's kind of an afterthought, but they want it, and then they're not, and then they say SEO doesn't work when it doesn't work. And so that it's, and I don't work with a lot of large companies, but that would be my experience talking to a lot of smaller companies. But it sounds like that experience might be universal for both small and large companies. And as far as getting buy-in from like the org, if it's like a very big company and we need to get buy-in across all of these different teams within the organization, have you seen any approaches work well in that regard?
So in our business, we have two sides of our business. We're primarily a SaaS company and we're a data company. We'll sell data to anybody, but we also have a strategic services, managed services arm that we have had to build out, and we're still building out because not every company has the internal resources to make everything work. And what we've noticed is that we'll sell data to anybody, but we can't provide those services to everybody because not all companies are going to take what needs to be done and actually run with it. And so one of the first questions that I ask to kind of determine what you're talking about, which is I want to assess the stance of the company to begin with. It'll be a series of questions like, does your executive management believe in SEO? Do they treat this as a priority? And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, can we talk to them? And if the answer is still no, then it's like, I don't think we can help you. You have to change that first before anything else happens. And so I've almost had to take a slightly more, I'm not naturally that aggressive, but I've had to become a little bit more assertive in that regard because, we don't want to waste our time. We don't want to waste customers' time. And that really seems to be a good way to get companies to kind of come to the table and say, okay, let's take this seriously because we do need to make this a priority.
We're about halfway through this episode of the Optimized podcast, and I just want to give a special shout out to our sponsor. You might have guessed, Positional.com. Check out their awesome set of tools for content marketers and SEOs. And now back to the podcast. Yeah, and I know you recently spoke at the Tokyo Digital Marketers Meetup. The topic of your presentation was how and why to use SERP data for more than just SEO. And I know that you have a lot of data and access to data at DemandSphere. How do we use SERP data for more than just SEO?
So to me, the two most adjacent teams that are relevant to this are going to be your ads team or your performance marketing team and your product team. The ads teams, it's still an evolving situation. I think the product side of things is very relevant. And it goes back to not a story, but a thing that happened to me when I first started in the industry, which was when the founders of the company at my previous company that I was at explained SEO to me for the first time. They said that Google is the front page for every website on the planet. And what that means, obviously, is that, if you understand that it's still today, may not be in the future, still today the largest source of traffic on the internet and probably a significant source of traffic for most businesses, that is where your customers are before they even come to you, if they ever do even come to you. And so as a product manager, why would you not want that data? It's all about collecting user feedback, understanding what they're going to do, predicting user behavior. So you have to have that. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be emphasized a lot more. We are seeing some of the smarter product teams start to understand that, invest pretty heavily in it.
So in other words, like using like SERP data to like predict how like trends might change or emerge?
That, and also like if you're a good product manager, and if your executive team knows what they're doing, they're going to be incentivizing the product team for growth. And so that growth has to come from somewhere. And so, you're going to pay for the growth. You're going to build a long-term asset that drives traffic over the long term through organic channels. That should be a product priority. So I think a lot of ways you can sum it up is basically SEO and product teams should be working much more closely together. And a lot of what happens in the SEO tools world is the workflows are so geared towards SEO analyst type people that a lot of times product managers who are trying to understand it aren't used to those workflows. They have their own KPIs, they have their own incentives, they have their own way of looking at the world. So I think there is a lot of value in trying to understand what these product teams need in terms of visualization, understanding of this data, and gear it more towards them.
Is that something you guys try to help with at Demands?
Yeah, by necessity, we do. And one of the ways that we had to solve it was, going back to this idea of holistic SERP monitoring. We took all of the SERP data that we had, we built a model of it in BigQuery and basically make it available as a data warehouse. And so that gives us a lot more flexibility where instead of showing, because the conversation is always like you give somebody a demo and the person who might potentially buy your software is saying, well, okay, but I need this view. Do you have this feature? And it's like, well, we can build it. Okay, let's talk again in 3 months when we have it. And so that's a very high friction process of product development on our side, and it doesn't really solve their problem. With the data warehouse, what we can do is just say, we've already got the data right there. We can write a single query that's going to give you exactly what you need. We can prototype it in Looker or whatever and get it in front of you right away. And now suddenly you've got something that can be a lot more relevant in giving answers to people who are not traditional SEO people. And that has helped us a lot. It's helped them a lot. And we're seeing a lot of growth in that area as a result.
I want to talk about the future of SEO. What do you make of the future of SEO? I know a lot of people have claimed SEO is dead or dying. What would you say to those folks?
Yeah, SEO has probably died 200 times since I've been in SEO over the last 17 years. I always wonder when it's going to be the actual death of SEO. It happens a lot. I think a lot of that statement is about the angst of not understanding it. And it's kind of wishful thinking, wishing that it would die and wishing that we could all just go back to paying for traffic. But long term, I don't necessarily think that Google is going to be the dominant player. I know that they're very worried about Gen Z. There's a lot of search behavior that happens on platforms that aren't necessarily traditional search engines. There's a whole debate about, like Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff. They're social platforms, but they have search capability and there's search happening there, and there's social feeds that are kind of like, I view them personally as like real-time SERPs that are just flying by everybody all the time. So I think search is going to get a lot more real time. I think you're going to have to be better at instantaneous meeting people where they are at right away. And you're going to have to get a lot more like multi-platform in the way that you reach your customers.
Yeah, what do you make of like something like a Perplexity? Should Google be worried about Perplexity?
I don't think they need to be worried about Perplexity, the company. It's an interesting thing. The domain sucks. Like no one's going to go use it. No offense to them, but I don't think like most normal searchers are going to go use Perplexity to find stuff. The model is interesting. It's obviously kind of what you see with Bing and ChatGPT with a little bit more anchoring data built in there. And it's a lot of what we see. We've probably both worked on a lot of LLM based projects by now where we're building like RAG systems or something to anchor the outputted content with real data that's unique. And there's a lot of stuff around that is interesting from a user perspective, but I don't think that particular product per se is going to be the one that changes things. But I do like what they're doing. I personally like playing around with it. But I think there's going to be a next iteration beyond that is a lot more intuitive for users that probably will not be them.
Yeah, and I agree with you. They have a very difficult name. Like my mom's not going to be going to Perplexity to get her answers. But you make an interesting point about like Gen Z and how they're using like social platforms often as search engines. And yeah, I think even like Facebook has started to go in this direction a little bit more recently, like possibly into search. And people always speculated that like Apple could make their way into search at a point if they wanted to, given that they have access to all of this other unique data that a platform like Google wouldn't have. But I say to a lot of our customers, like there's always going to be a need for like helpful web pages. I think like the distribution engine might change over time, but users are still going to need to access helpful web pages, I think. I mean, if they're not, like, then Ray, we got to quit.
Gotta go
Um,
do something else.
so yeah, maybe we'll sell a course or something like that. But as far as Google search goes, like, do you think SGE is going to like roll out everywhere this year? I know it feels like it keeps getting delayed.
I lean towards thinking that it will, but I think we've been monitoring it. The early versions of it, it was very aggressive. It all comes down to me in terms of how much it's going to get used and how much of an impact it's going to have is whether or not it's auto expanding. And what we've seen is that initially it was auto expanding like at least half the time for a lot of the queries that we looked at, which is very obtrusive for the user. It's almost not auto expanding. Maybe depending on your like vertical, it could anywhere be like 10 to 20% of the time. So that's nice from a user perspective because it means I can safely ignore it. I'm just not sure what that means for their strategy around SGE. Long term, I'm not super bullish on it as a great feature. I think it's kind of coming out of their panic about ChatGPT and so forth, but we'll see. I could be wrong about that. It's just my sense.
Yeah, I tend to fall into the camp that like Google doesn't want to release SG. I'm gonna botch these statistics, and so I'm not going to quote any statistic directly. But I think we saw even with like featured snippets that it reduced click-through rate for like the entire SERP for many keywords, not just organic but also paid. And so you'd have to think if SG placements are, these much larger featured snippets, it could have a pretty negative impact on click-through rate for the entire SERP, including Google Ads.
And ads. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I do wonder how concerned Google is about that. But also the point you mentioned earlier about like compute and the cost of resources. My understanding is that it's very also too expensive for Google to serve SG everywhere.
I agree. I think that'll be the thing that really kills it.
Yeah, and we'll see. We'll see where we go from here. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know, like SG hasn't been rolled out everywhere in any country, right? You still have to opt into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as far as like besides SG and the changes in the year ahead, it feels like lately with the spam updates, everyone's like not as excited about like AI generated content. I feel like I've been screaming about this for the last year, but like, what do you make of like AI generated content or maybe AI generated web pages, not necessarily content in today's day of age?
Yeah, actually, I'd love to talk to you about this more in general because I know that you have a lot of really great tools on this as well. But um, I am not opposed to AI generated content with some caveats. We ended up having to build an engine to do it for our customers. We built this thing called Prose Vector. And basically, the use case for that was how do we do this for tens of thousands of URLs to create quality content, and basically came down to anchoring that in unique data that the customer had. But even with that, the big caveat we would always give to our customers was that you should never publish any of this without having human eyeballs and hands on it, because I view the way we explain it is turn your writers into editors. With the large programmatic sites or e-commerce catalogs that people have, it is a real challenge to keep content updated for these huge sites. And so why not let AI do a lot of the heavy lifting in that context? But please don't spam the internet with your garbage AI generated content. Let's actually create legitimate content that has had a human touch to it and adds real value to the user. Because if you don't, you're gonna get crushed in the rankings anyway. So like we should all be incentivized to be creating quality content. It doesn't matter if it's human or AI created or assisted.
It's a controversial topic on this podcast. I tend to lean to the side of like, let's not use AI generated content because, at least in my experience, if I'm trying to like edit a piece of like AI generated content, it often just takes me longer to do that than if I were to just write something from scratch by hand. So I don't really save a lot of time, I don't think. But I'm guessing like if a client you work with is an e-commerce company and they've got millions of URLs, then it maybe is a different story.
Is your use case mostly like SaaS and like blogging and that sort of thing? Thought leadership type stuff?
Our website, like our blog, like we don't use AI generated content. And then also most of the customers we work with are like B2B SaaS, your stereotypical like Series A SaaS company.
I completely agree with you in that context. Like, I would not use it there either. I think the whole point of doing that is thought leadership. So it doesn't really make sense for it in that.
Yeah. And e-commerce SEO is like a whole nother animal. I feel like I've tried not to go anywhere near it. It's kind of like local SEO for me. Like I know it exists, but it's just not something I'm going to spend that much time trying to figure out. Like how, and this is probably a stupid question, but like how is e-commerce SEO very different than like traditional content SEO?
From my view, this is a lot of where I got my strong opinions on building an operation, because we got spoiled early on with the companies, especially working in Japan. The companies that became the category leaders that we work with are the ones that have just an insane amount of operational discipline about looking at the ranking data, looking at the SERP data, turning that into the next level of iteration. And it's a lot of what we see kind of in product development in the US, where we have like continuous integration, continuous deployment. You don't have to automate things as much on the deployment side of things, but you still have this cycle. And so this is why I talk a lot about how what we're selling, yeah, we sell you data, but ideally that data is getting turned into intelligence one way or another. And intelligence, if you come from like any security related world, whether it's cybersecurity or even military, where a lot of this stuff originated, is that intelligence has a life cycle. That's how you know it is intelligence. It's not just like facts. And so a lot of like what gets treated as traditional BI is just dashboards, but it's not really intelligence because there's no workflow associated with it. And so the e-commerce companies that become the category leaders, they have search built into their DNA at the highest levels, and they have these hardcore teams that just go after it every single day, and they don't let things just happen by accident.
Yeah, we had a guest on that like swore that the Amazon, like the SEO was like the thing that built Amazon. I don't know how much about that story, but
I don't have any direct contact there, but I believe it.
yeah, apparently they were saying it was Mika Lepisto. We had him back on in the podcast in December, and he'd mentioned that like from the get go, like SEO was core to Amazon's strategy. We don't really think about that today. Like we kind of just like assume that Amazon's on the first page, but they are on the first page for a reason. I think intentionally. Um, no, someone actually went out of their way to be on the first page for every one of these keywords. Um, um, and Ray, this has been so much fun. If it's okay with you, I've got like a few rapid fire questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Japan, I know you spend a lot of time there. I know you've got a lot of customers in Japan. Can you tell me more about like how you got into Japan?
Yeah, so it's good timing now because you may have seen this show, Shogun, that came out like in the last 2 months. It's been a very popular show. I read that book totally by random chance when I was like 10 years old. I happened to pull it off the shelf at the local library, read it instantly, like made me fascinated with the whole country and culture. And I watched the original series back in the day. And by the time I got to college, I finally had the opportunity to study Japanese and live over there as an exchange student. And since that point in time, Japan's just been part of my life since my early 20s. And so I built my business there originally. I left this startup that I was mentioning earlier, moved to Japan. I was consulting for some companies there and decided to built the company. When I launched the company, it didn't used to be called DemandSphere. It was called Ginza Metrics. And Ginza is this kind of like the Fifth Avenue of Tokyo. It's where all the nice luxury brands are. And so Ginza, in my view, was kind of like, since I was enterprise and related to commerce, it's basically like Ginza is like the platform for selling high ticket items. And so I wanted to be the platform that helped companies do that online through SEO. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
Is SEO and Japanese like structurally or fundamentally that much different than doing SEO in English, or it's the same?
No, it's the same ideas. Obviously, you have a more complicated morphology and NLP type stuff with the double byte characters and languages and everything, but it's the basic principles are all the same.
And I'm sure you have access to so much interesting data at DemandSphere. And I have to ask, like, how important are title tags? Are they pretty important in terms of driving click-through rate?
Yeah, I think they matter a lot because it goes back to user engagement. And so I think that, again, just speaking as a user, when you see something that catches your attention, you're likely to click on it. And so all the data reveals this as well. We've had some very, very successful optimization projects that occurred for these large sites simply by title and meta tag optimization. And everyone says that it doesn't matter anymore. And you'll hear these experts talk about how it doesn't matter because Google has said to some degree it doesn't matter. It matters.
Well, Google has said a lot of things don't matter, including like backlinks, user behavior, signals and metrics, keywords. They've said you don't need to use keywords. They've also said you don't need to use headers. I would say most things don't matter. I mean, Google does say that like HTTPS matters, and that's like a ranking factor, but links and engagement signals, those things don't matter. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Title tags are often like a very low hanging fruit, especially for like clients like yours that might have millions of pages. A small adjustment could really move the needle. As far as like rich snippets go, is that important? Should we be paying attention to rich snippets?
Yeah, I think so. Again, from our view, anything that has an impact on that visibility on the SERP, the users are paying attention to it, and it's either driving traffic or attention, and both of those are things that people should care about.
Can you guys actually track like the depth of your snippet? So like or the depth of your SERP result, I should say. So if we've got like a rich snippet, we're taking up more real estate on the first page for that query. Is that something you can actually like report back to your clients?
Yeah, that's part of our core reporting is we measure not only the depth of that item, but the actual pixel height of it. So you know what that impact is.
Gotcha. And have you seen that like the more pixel height or the more depth of your SERP result, that generally means more traffic?
So you're saying like the deeper, do you mean when you say depth, you mean higher on the visual page or?
I should say like the more real estate that your SERP result is taking up. So like, for example, if you've got like the little stars under your, like with reviews under your SERP result, like we have now like a thicker SERP result. Does that generally lead to more traffic?
Yes, because it's capturing that attention. And, this is one of those areas too, where you have to be looking at your Search Console data for the click-through rate for that keyword, and you have to kind of like model backwards. But it's definitely impactful.
Gotcha. And last question, like tell us about DemandSphere.
Yeah. So we've always been a very remote-oriented company. So we've got people all over the world. We operate 24/7. Team size is about 25 people right now. And I'm really lucky in the people that I work with because everybody is ride or die. And we've just kind of like filtered for that personality over the years. And so it's the most dedicated team of people I've ever worked with. Everyone is just, we try to prioritize family and personal time and stuff, but sometimes things happen and everyone just knows that they just jump in, and it's not, I never have to really force it. So I feel very lucky in that regard. Our customers love us. A lot of our customer relationships are, 8, 9, 10 years old. They just stick with us over the years. And so that's pretty unusual in the SaaS industry.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to like learn more about DemandSphere or get in touch with you, how should they do that?
Yeah, demandsphere.com is the easiest way. Send us a note. You can find me on Twitter. I've got like 100 followers. You can find me on LinkedIn, and we're always happy to chat.
Yeah, well, I know it doesn't matter, but you've built at least one backlink today. We'll include a link back to DemandSphere in the show notes.
Appreciate it.
And for all the listeners, if you're not already following Ray on LinkedIn, you should be. I know we've quoted Ray a few times from his LinkedIn posts on this episode of the Optimized podcast. So we will include a link back to your LinkedIn as well, where everyone should go and follow you, Ray. But Ray, thank you so much for coming on the Optimized podcast. This was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Optimized podcast. This episode was brought to you by Positional. At Positional, we've got tools for content optimization, keyword research, internal linking, and so much more. We'd love for you to check Positional out at positional.com. And you can always reach out to me too if you have any questions at nate@positional.com.